This is hell, there can be no doubt about it. A perpetual reddish light fills every space, every inch, every hole. The crackle of unseen fire mixes with the screams of tortured souls, the noise a constant crescendo crashing against the senses. A tireless assault eroding the sanity of all those lost within the realm, at least of those that got any sanity left. The ground is covered with bodies, some broken and torn beyond recognition, crushed, smashed, ripped asunder. Some still somewhat recognizable, their faces seemingly alive, staring at the passer-by, their eyes reliving the last images of their existence. The image of their killer forever visible in their eyes. Some seem to plead, hands upheld. Some try to protect themselves, their fingers or hands torn by large caliber bullets, as their heads rip apart impossible slow at the moment of impact before reforming once more just to repeat the gruesome spectacle. Women, children, men, they are all here, their souls bound to that of their killer. Trapped, kept prisoner, barred from moving on. In the distance, shimmering in the heat, a large hill of round stones. What looks like boiling blood blubbering runs in the thin rivers through the cracks of the ground of that blasted and defiled landscape. A sense of forlornness, loneliness, and deep despair weighting down on the passer-by, seeming to want to crush them underneath their weight. Hands grab at the legs, reaching out of piles of mangled bodies, clinging to limbs and gear, begging to be saved, yet threatening to drag down who or whatever they get a hold of. Is this what Earth was destined to be if the gates of heaven stayed closed and God's love fading? Madness. All of it. Chippy walks on, unsure if she was being led or if it was her own free will, eyes downcast and depressed, unseeing as she passed through the halls of this hell. A hand grabbed at her legs and she trips, scraping her knee on the hard cobblestone beneath her. She once again pushes herself to her feet, failing to brush herself off, but continues on, unseeing, unfeeling, unhearing, just placing one foot in front of the other till she arrives at her destined appointment. Words echo through her head. Mushed at first, too many voices to be understood, only slowly do they begin to form audible patterns, dragging the deepest fears out of every corner of her soul. Things long thought forgotten, hidden, gone, now they come back to the surface, like black tar seeping up in her very being, clinging to her soul.
Why? You left us. It's your fault. You are nothing. You are a burden. Worthless.
Evoking hell inside of her as surely as it was outside and all around of her. No matter what direction she goes, the hill in front of her coming closer and ever closer. Drawn to it, unable to escape her fate. Like a moth drawn to the flame, no matter how hard it struggled. The scrapes in her knees bleeding furiously, much more than they should. The blood mixing with the first traces of yellow ichor. A deep voice echoes over the landscape, or maybe it was just in her head. Dark, evil.
It seems the first little crosshumber has arrived.
The words dripping with madness and malice. Chippy looks up, her eyes tracing the outlines of the hill before her eyes move back down to her feet. She sees the blood.
What have I done?
She whispers as she watches the blood flow down her legs, joining the rest of the blood into the rivers. Something was off about this blood that mixed in with the rest that flowed downstream. There was a sheen to it, an almost type of fine golden glitter mixed in with it. Chippy, however, did not seem to notice. All she saw was the face of the exiled who tasted her blood and the look of pure malaise towards her. Then another face filled her vision. Ruby. The face she wore as her blood had transformed her. The sheer pain. Then Kinshin's face came to focus. The look of pain and terror upon her as it faded away, replaced by that of her parents. Her mother being slaughtered by another, and her father's look of disappointment as he looked upon her as she watched him being ripped from existence in front of her eyes. Tears start streaming down her cheeks now as she slowly places one foot in front of the other, climbing the endless hill, expecting to see the 3 crosses awaiting her at the top, for her to receive judgment for the wrongs she had bestowed on the others in her life. The stones of the hill are heads. Untold numbers of heads, young and old, some skeletal, some fresh, still bleeding. Their eyes seemed to track her, no matter how impossible that was. They looked at her. All of them. Her feet sinking into the soft hair, some sticky with blood, others brittle with age. Every head a cobblestone on her way up. Every head a sin on her road through life. And it had taken many cobblestones. Stacked onto each other, smushed together, piled up high. They chant a single word. Quiet at first, not much more than a whisper in the backdrop of tormented screams. Then slowly louder and louder. Fallen, 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 fallen! Where the golden hue of her blood falls, a skull falls silent. A soul released from anguish. There were many skulls, and it was a long road. On the top of the hill, right on that smooth curve visible in the distance, were 2 shapes recognizable. One of them impossible broad and massive even when watched from Chippy's position. Even though it should not have been possible, as there was no sun or other discernible single source of light, the shadow of crosses began to grow from her, left, right, and back, becoming deeper and darker with every step she took, with every desperate struggle of her tormented soul, with every heartbeat weighted down by sin. Chippy looks down at the faces she is walking over, whispering a soft, "Please forgive me," to each one as she goes, glittering tears falling from her cheeks as she lays more torment to the heads and faces. Some she recognizes as students from the university she spent most of her adult life hiding in. "I should have stayed and protected you," was her whisper. Chippy was weeping now, her beginning drawing closer as the heads changed from human to wolf and her old packmates from her adolescence bear her white. "You died because I wasn't stronger," Chippy moans, continuing ever forward, ever upwards. She gets to about the top of the hill, and there are her packmates from when she was born and into her childhood. All slaughtered because she was born, because she is the daughter of an archangel and a wolf. Something forbidden in the world. "It's all my fault," None of these beings deserve this fate. They all die because I exist. Chippy gets to the top of the hill and falls to her knees in front of the huge cross, blessing its base with her tears. Unseen winds buffet her, pummeling her, seeming to vent their rage on her. Forms writhing around her, jumping back into the familiar forms just to jump at her again a moment later. Wet gusts covering her feet as she wades ankle deep through carnage. The crosses growing out of her, rising up and around her, fully taking shape. Her sins growing out of her. As she falls to her knees, the gruel of blood and guts mix with her blood, seemingly trying to drain every last drop circulating within her body. A discordant scent of wine mixed within itself perpetuates the place. The corpses on the cross speaking in one sick, wet voice.
You left us. It's all because of you. You should have never been born. You are stained. Stained!
A desperate howl lost in the wind. It is the wind. Heavy footfalls coming closer. Chippy can sense it more than hear it. She was not alone with her sins. Something else or someone else was here as well. Chippy falls to her knees and lays curled into a ball. No strength left. This was her destination. This was where she was meant to spend her eternity. She continued to weep, huddled into her little ball, her body twitching each time the voice spoke. Pain shooting through her with each accusation. Her entire being shook with the guilt of her crimes.
Please. Please.
She would stagger out between raking sobs.
Please. I didn't know.
She would try to gasp out. As she heard, no, sensed the footsteps, she would huddle even more into herself, shivering, trembling.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry.
Would be the quiet plea. All her strength now depleted. He would just lie there, the chest jumping from the sobs, still wrecking her body. Chippy's entire being vibrating from the deliberating sadness overcoming her. A dark shadow pushes through the crosses, the corpses, breaking through them as if they were waves breaking on the ragged stone face of a cliff. Each step a sucking sound in the ankle-deep guts covering the ground. Brutal shape of armor black and red, glistening in the hellish light as if it was slick with blood. The voice seeping out of the creature dark, deep and despicable.
So you are sorry, are you, little cross-humper?
Coming to a halt in front of the curled-up body, Raven towers above her. In this world even more monstrous as he was when they met in the Metroplex last.
Nobody gives a fuck!
Reaching down, the clawed demonic hands ruthlessly push aside her protective hands, fingertips like knives cutting her skin almost to the bone as he grabs her by the clothing on her chest and lifts her up, without any visible sign of effort, bringing the female on his outstretched arm to about level with his masked face. The red visory screen twitching and moving as if it was a living snake. Maybe it had always been. Maybe it was an effect of this place.
You will have the rest of eternity to think about what you did.
Walking forward, or maybe it was the top of the hill changing as it seems all the shades and corpses drew back a few meters, revealing a small cross, too small for any adult, but just the right size for Raven's voice cutting through her conscience like a knife.
There is one cross still empty, but we can change that.
The small cross twisting and breathing as if it had a life on its own, waiting for something so it could seal her fate forever.
Let's make sure you will truly appreciate the rest of eternity.
A single claw running down over her belly, almost gentle, touch barely noticeable among the cacophony of sounds and impressions assaulting her. Chippy looks up at the figure of Raven, eyes seeing yet unseeing. She watches the face for a moment, tears still glistening down her cheeks, and every now and then a gasp left over from the racking sobs from moments before. Suddenly there seemed a calm about her as her eyes softened.
I forgive you. Thank you for setting me free, for showing me my sins. I am ready for my punishment.
She looks down as the claw traces her now flat belly, no sign of having ever been pregnant. Did she lose it before she came here or after? Time was running together for her. So many faces of past wrongs now haunted her. Thousands of years of memories only barely touching the surface. Chippy's eyes lock onto Raven's.
Take me where I belong.
The red visor seemingly staring at her.
Forgiveness? You forgive me?
The artificial voice dripping with incredulous hatred. The cross rising behind her, getting larger and larger. The Chaos Marine smashes Chippy's body against it, the heat of the material scorching the skin on her back. The head comes closer, the living jaw of the rebreather mask seemingly snapping at her face.
I don't give a rat's ass for your forgiveness.
Reaching behind his back with his free hand, he produces a long rusty spike.
On the contrary.
The voice a low growl, smashing the spike through her left shoulder and into the cross behind her.
What I want from you?
Reaching for a second spike before smashing it into her right shoulder.
Is your damnation!
A new spike. Letting go of her clothing, forcing her arms onto the side of the cross.
And I will get what I want!
Ramming the spike through her wrist. Getting a fourth spike while forcing her other arm onto the cross.
For with you here, in this place.
Slowly, incredibly slowly, but with a force seemingly unstoppable, forcing the last spike through her other wrist.
The connection is open to your physical body in that damned city.
Stepping back, looking at his handiwork.
And we both know there's a soul due to be born soon.
Falling silent, letting the howling mad souls of demons and devils screaming in this hellish nightmare guide her to her own conclusion. Chippy just hangs there loosely, letting him manhandle her. Her eyes never leaving the visor, never leaving Raven's eyes. Each spike that pierces her skin flings Chippy's blood onto him. As he moves Chippy, it's like moving a marionette doll. He has full control of her movement. With each spike, a sigh of relief escapes Chippy as her eyes closed in enjoyment before opening back up and watching him once more.
Everyone deserves forgiveness, whether they want it or not.
Chippy looks to where the latest spike pierced her body, then shakes her head.
No, I am free. I am no longer of the mortal plane. You have released me of the burden of sin.
Chippy looks to Raven, and for the first time since she had been cast upon hell, she smiles. A bright, glowing smile.
My soul has been weighted and measured, and I have been found guilty for my sin. I will suffer my fate.
Her smile fades and a serious expression fills her entire being.
Even now your soul is being weighted and measured. Will you accept your fate? Will you tear open your soul and face your demons? Will you join me in expelling your sin?
With that, she closes her eyes, and from her wounds to Raven's mind's eye, black tar seems to drip from Chippy's wounds. Chippy smiles, and in the reflection of the black puddles that begin to form are reflections of each time she sliced herself, every broken finger that she repaired before breaking them again, then back further to the times that she had been lustful, each sin revealed, each drop containing one of those sins. Chippy's eyes snap open as the black tar turns back to bright red glowing blood. Eventually, the glowing, glittering blood makes a pool around the cross, lighting up that area.
I will atone for my sins.
Her voice disembodied.
Will you?
At those last words, Chippy's head drops to her chest and she seems to be unconscious. Where the drops of blood hit his armor, the thick layers of plast steel corrode as it begins to eat through it like acid. Looking down at the damage to his form, his head flicking back up.
You damned little!
Seeing her face drop downward, he jumps forward.
Don't you dare!
Roaring as his armored boot touches a puddle of blood on the floor, the demonic infestation hissing in disgust, or maybe even pain. Yanking her head back up and smashing it against the cross.
Oh, you are not dying yet, little crosshumper. Not until I am done with you.
Snarling as he turns away. Things were beginning to slip his control, and he didn't like it. Not one bit. Stepping back, carefully evading the blood on the floor, he reaches into the bloody guts, revealing a large rusty chain, impossible thick. Beginning to pull it towards him, it rises up from the gore. A thin groan, almost swallowed by the place, can be heard.
Shut up!
The monster barks, pulling faster and faster as the bloody shape at the end of the chain, wrapped tight and secured, is dragged in front of the cross.
Wake up, bastard!
The heavy boots crushing the man's hand, raising him from his semi-conscious state. The smell of wine becoming more intense now. Volbert grunts in pain, forcing one eye to open, the other ripped out, just a bloody hole left. Blinking a few times to clear his remaining sight before he recognizes the shape on the cross. Chippy? Quiet at first, almost disbelieving, then louder. "Chippy!" Towards the armored creature. "What did you do to her?" Back to the woman at the cross. "Chippy! Wake up! Wake up!" Forcing himself into a kneeling position, the chains grinding through his flesh, bone visible in some spots, black infected blood clinging to him, screaming in hatred at Raven. "Let her go!" Chippy heaves a deep sigh and looks down at Wolbert.
I saw you. You brought me here to find redemption for my sins.
She takes another deep, slow breath as the blood slows to a drip from her pierced veins.
Thank you.
She whispers.
Thank you for allowing me the chance for atonement.
Her eyes solely focused on Wolbert, seeing him but at the same time not seeing the condition he was in. She smiles to him, a warm, broad smile that seems to light up the darkness between them. Wolbert listens to her words, confused for a moment, looking over at Raven. "Oh no, you didn't." Coughing as he spits bloody flame onto the ground. Trying to raise his arm to touch Chippy, but the chains cutting the movement short. "I didn't." Finally catching on to Raven's plan, his face taking on a mask of disbelief. Raven laughing darkly.
Oh yes, they will do what I can't, and then I will finally be free of your meddling.
Wolbert strains against his chains in rage, the material creaking even in his wounded and weakened state. But they hold fast, breathing hard as he looks at her warm smile, realizing that there was only one possible outcome for this. "Chippy, Chippy, listen to me. You cannot stay here. You need to go back." Voice low and serious, yet caring for her torture and guilt. He didn't know what she saw or heard. Hell was a very personal thing. "You need to blow out the candle. You must go home." Chippy looks to Wolbert in confusion.
But there is no candle to blow out. This is my home now, here with you, to pay for my crimes.
Chippy smiles again.
I belong here. It is fate's plan. The others are better off without me. I only cause pain where I go.
Chippy looks around to all the faces, the heads littering the ground.
This is all my fault. I deserve to be crucified.
Chippy smiles again, that warm, bright smile, then raises her smile to Raven, then back down to Wolbert.
You have done well.
The disembodied voice starts again.
Atone for the crimes that you have committed, and you too shall see the glory of the Lord.
Then she was nodding off again. Raven flexes his claws impatiently, crackling in unconcealed glee as he sees a bloody tear run over Wolbert's bruised face. Gathering all his courage for a moment before Wolbert speaks, voice calm and even, every consequence of what was to come carefully hidden. A dark foreboding of things to come taking shape in his heart of hearts, but he hid it all from her. She was a victim as much as the others had been. "Yes, Chippy. Yes, there is a candle. Look closer. Closer!" as a dark pus breaks out on his chest and a thick larvae eats its way out before dropping with a plop onto the floor. He groans in pain, and it takes a moment before he can gather enough strength to continue. This hell is not yours, Chippy. It's mine and his. You need to go home. Look, Chippy, look for the candle. It is there. Chippy doesn't respond. She just hangs there limply, barely breathing. Raven watches the unfolding happenings. While his visor and rebreather were hiding his face, he seemed almost unmoved. But only almost. The demonic jaw on his boot snapped its teeth in anticipation, and the devilish maw of the rebreather dropped glittering salvia. Were she to fully submit to hell, her fate would be sealed either way. One more bond broken. One more defense of that troublesome do-good piece of shit shattered. He didn't care for Chippy, at least not more than he would for a mayfly crushed under his boot at worst, or a tool to be used and discarded at best. The visor shifted as he scanned the woman's form on the cross. The blood was almost gone. The golden hue he could see had almost faded from her. Soon, just a little bit more and her soul would be swallowed, breaking another of the seals. There were only 3 left to go. Wake up! Chippy! Wake up, girl! Wake up! Volbert's voice tore him out of his visions of glory and conquest.
Shut up!
Kicking the bound form in the small of his back, sending him face forward into the muck of blood, guts, and the fleeting traces of gold dripping from her form, swirling within, that had gathered at the foot of the cross. Volbert fell forward hard, the chains crushing him, surely shattering even his reinforced ribs. He lay in the mud, twitching.
Pathetic.
The Chaos Marine growled.
And you were a warrior once.
Looking over at Chippy, scanning for signs of life. It was almost over now. The heartbeat was irregular, weak. Reaching for Walbert's head, grabbing him by his hair and pulling him back up.
Watch her die in despair, for her only fault was knowing you.
Volbert's face was a mask of blood, a nightmarish sight of horror in its own right. Gore dripped down his chest, his lips pressed shut, cheeks swollen.
Witness her!
Raven interrupted himself as he sensed something was amiss.
No!
The monstrously distorted voice roared as Volbert exhaled with every last ounce of strength. Blasting a red mix of blood, her own blood, his blood, the blood of this very place, and just a few traces of the heavenly essence mixed within, straight into her face. Look! He screamed at her, despair and determination warring within his voice at the same time. The slick wetness hits Chippy like a tidal wave, forcing her head back, shaking her from the edge of unconsciousness. As she opens her eyes, she sits at a large wooden desk. The smell of old papers and leathers filling her nostrils. The silence of the place is reassuring, the atmosphere comforting. She knows this place intimately. She has been here many times before, sneaked in as a child. The college library in Kansas. Did she have had another of her blackouts? Chippy looks around at the room before her. She runs her fingers along the desk and lets her hand rest on the book left open. The one that she had left open as she had many years ago. The page held the start of a new chapter. Halfway through the book, though, her mind's eye couldn't make out the print. She lifted her gaze from the book and looked around the deserted floor, and the quiet seemed unnerving after being used to the constant bustle of activity of her life in Cola. Chippy thinks hard about that memory. Cola. Was it a dream or was it reality? She turns her head and tries to look behind her, then tries to feel behind her for the wings that used to adorn her back. Instead, she found that they were gone and her tail bound up around her waist instead. Chippy reaches up slowly and feels a hat on her head, covering her ears. She blinks and snatches a book and hurries off to a dark corner, fearful that anyone at any moment might wander in and find her and discover her secret. She had a sense of déjà vu, as if this whole thing had played out before her once before. A sense of foreboding filling her as she hugged the book close to her chest while cowering in the dark corner.
Not again,
she whispered as her necklace, the gems white as snow, started to glow on her chest, an invisible bubble forming around her. The place's darkness seemed to creep closer, a barely visible change at first as a multitude of candles that kept it at bay with a warm golden glow seemed to get duller at first, less intense before finally being snuffed out. Had it always been candles? The book warm against Chippy's chest, the tome heavy in her arms, the sense of foreboding intensifying with every passing moment. Had this happened before? It had, hadn't it? Slowly the bubble around her begins to take shape, engulfing her, shielding her, hiding her. Would it be enough? More light faded away. It began at the far edge of the hall, the darkness creeping closer like a predator on the hunt. Chippy closes her eyes and holds her breath, feeling the weight of the tomb against her chest. She tries to breathe deep and slow, clearing her mind of the impending doom that keeps getting stronger and stronger. The bubble surrounding her takes shape, golden in glow, with a slight sizzle and humming from the energy keeping it active. The closer the darkness gets, the stronger the energy and the brighter the necklace glows. Chippy squeezes the book tighter against her. Something about the book seemed special to her, but she was unsure of why or what meaning it held. A memory tugged at her conscience, but fear and dread kept her from being able to look at it. To read the page it was stuck open on, the story that lay before her if she were to just look down and read. Was it her story or someone else's? She was so confused now. Memories of a cross tried to flood her mind. Someone calling for her, screaming her name. But no, she mustn't remember that. To remember that? The deeper she pushed the memory, the stronger the bubble became. Hands seemed to reach out for her, ethereal and non-corporeal extremities made of dreams and nightmares. Just shadows for now, kept at bay by the protective bubble, but how much longer would it stay that way? What did the book hold? Was it salvation or damnation? The portraits at the wall showing scenes and figures eerily familiar to Chippy. One showing what might be a lab, a large machine visible, possible a microscope, a cat's tail flickering briefly as if the person shown had just stepped out of the visible arc of the painter. Another frame, dark and empty, as if darkness had filled it and drowned out any color. The many hidden and locked memories in her mind straining against their bonds, struggling to rise up once more, to tear her down. More candles extinguish as the darkness encroaches. Just a handful are left now. As the darkness approaches and the light around Chippy intensifies, the darkness fighting a useless struggle against the dark, the title of the book itself begins to glow too, warming Chippy's soul with its presence as well as getting heavier in her arms till she can no longer hold it. Before the book falls to the floor, the page is still open to its original spot. It glows. Holy Bible. Chippy's eyes fly open as she loses the strength to continue to hold her book to her anymore. Chippy looks down, finally able to read the words. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Chippy blinks as the words change from son to daughter, then back and forth till they stuck on daughter, and her shield suddenly drops. Memories of the wading through the mountain of gore and then being hung on a cross floods her mind as she just still watches each candle closing in on her extinguishes. A faint echo of Wolbert telling her to snuff out her own candle. She looks around for one that seems to be hers as the last few go out. The hands reach out now and touch her, reminding her of things in the distant past. She looks at the cat person and whispers, "Shiva?" Just as the final candle remains, the only light coming from the pages of the Bible beside her. Chippy places her hand on it, caressing the pages. More and more pictures get swallowed by the encroaching darkness. What was real? What was memory? What was illusion? The candles in front of the painting slowly being swallowed one after the other. Only one candle is left now. It stands in front of a gold-framed mirror, its surface pristine. As the shield drops around Chippy, her image becoming visible in the mirror, the frame turning it into a window. The darkness is close now, carrying something within it, coming closer. The sound of too many teeth and claws snapping or clicking on the floor, searching, hunting for her. As the book at the floor starts to crumble in ash, dread begins to press down on the smallish circle of light. Was it her own dread? Or that of someone else? Lines between Chippy and the world around her begin to blur. Her picture in the mirror fading away, opening a window into the past. Red-armored warriors storming barricades through withering fire, descending on jetpacks into the line of defenders holding a bloody harvest. The silhouette of a raven with a blood drop in its center marking the armor. They look like Raven might once have looked before he turned into the perverted and twisted mockery of his former self, of Wolbert. The red-armored Marines mow down enemies without mercy, crushing them under their boots, no matter of age or gender. There is no remorse, no regrets. The muzzle flashes reminding Chippy of the hellish light on the hill. The image changes. Wolbert seemingly making a deal with a winged creature. Only outlines can be made out. An angel? More images follow. They change, sometimes torn with violence, sometimes with images of him trying to help or protect others. But they are far and few in between. The last image of a ruined bridge high above Kola. A slender shadow closes in on Wolbert, a woman from the proportions, but the face blurry, impossible to make out any features. Before the encounter unfolds, the image changes back to Chippy's own picture. A voice is audible, sounding as if spoken from far away in a great hall. Was it real, or in her head? "Well, child," You have seen the evidence. Volbert has been Raven, a killer and a murderer. Hundreds have died by his hand, but he has made a pact with me to work for me and work off his debt. He has been useful, even helping a few souls here and there, but so few in comparison. In the end, he broke the pact for killing and by his deeds dooming innocent to a fate worse than death, even indirectly causing the death of a person he cared for deeply. As part of the jury, you are now asked to cast your vote. Snuff the last candle and offer him to darkness, returning to your home safely. Or keep it alight and face the darkness yourself, but be warned. Should you decide to let the candle burn, a small part of his guilt will stay with you. Now then, cast your vote. The voice, as soft as it was utterly sincere. How would Chippy decide? Had Raven bled enough of her soul out of her on the cross? Whatever was in the darkness, it was almost on top of her. She had to decide. Now. Chippy watches the movie of a memory, 1,000 memories, play out in front of her, then hears the eerie voice. She closes her eyes and remembers the text that had been in the Bible, and she opens her eyes again and turns away from the candle and towards the darkness. Softly she speaks. For God so loved the world that he gave his only daughter, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. Chippy takes a deep breath and steps forward into the looming darkness, her head held high. Another deep breath and she whispers again. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. She takes another step forward, determination set on her face. I take Volbert and his jailer's sins upon me. I shall be their savior, their light in their time of darkness. I shall bear their burdensome crosses. Chippy states loudly. As the echo of her voice fades, silence descends, each second stretching to a small eternity. So it shall be. The soft voice echoes in her mind. The mirror image ripples, the translucency fading to be replaced by a still image. It's a portrait so masterfully done it almost seems lifelike. It's a portrait of her. The flame of the candle flickering ever so slightly, falling motionless, perfectly preserved in mid-motion as angelic runes slowly appear carved into the candle's body, spelling her name, her true name. And so the first guardian has taken her place. Something screams in the dark, rage, hatred, the many voices of sins unforgiven. In nomine Patris. The entity in the darkness rushes forward, drawn to the light, the floor vibrating as if a stampede was getting closer. In nomine Filii. The thunder gets louder, heralding the approaching storm of madness. In nomine Spiritus Sancti. Its foetid breath poisoning the air, the sound of claws pushing out of fleshy extensions, salvia dripping onto the floor, muscles curling to jump. Amen. As the world fades from her mind, her heart beats strong in her ears. Then the darkness crashes against her. Chippy glances at the portrait and takes in its beauty, then watches as a candle freezes and words are etched into place. She turns her gaze then to the sound and smell flying towards her, to the eternal darkness. As it envelops her, Chippy stands proud, head held high, accepting her fate, accepting the sins of those before her. Like a tidal wave, the darkness crashes against her, a maelstrom of faces, of teeth, of claws, of things too horrible to be named, snapping maws and slashing tentacles. In the eye of the storm, a light in the darkness, she stands. A sanctuary of sanity amidst the swirling chaos. A single strand of darkness slowly pushing into the circle of light, thin like a needle about chest height, hovering for just a moment. On the outside, in the madness, Raven's form becomes visible, blurred as if standing in fluid, his armor showing damages from where her blood has hit him, his voice cutting through the storm, dripping with hatred.
You made your choice, Cloud Humper.
Raising his hand as if holding a spear.
Now pay the price.
Thrusting his arm forward, the needle-like venter black penetrates her chest. Chippy watches Raven form in the darkness. Her eyes lock on his through his face mask, still standing tall, still holding her head high. As he speaks and is moving his arm, it's like time stands still for her. Her eyes move to the spear of darkness that he's holding, then back up to his eyes.
I forgive you of all your sins now and your sins yet to come.
Suddenly time returns to normal speed and the darkness pierces her chest. Chippy cries out in pain, but locks her legs, taking on Raven's burden. She forces her eyes open and, looking back into his, she grits her teeth, cutting off her cry, taking all the darkness that is being thrust into her. Part of Raven's form begins to dissolve. The process her blood has started, continuing even more. Like a figure of wax standing in the sun. Then the world falls away below her, slowly at first. Chippy can feel herself being lifted up. The madness below her getting smaller and smaller until even Raven's glowing visor disappears. She moves faster now, towards the light far above as a connection to the realm is dissolving. This fight for Wolbert's soul has been won, but the war was not yet over. 2 mirrors still remained.
Oof!
Chippy falls into the old couch in the upper attic of the church where she had laid down after the attack in the church from Raven. The memory of the place already receding like the lingering tendrils of a nightmare. Only a dull pain in her chest remaining. The sounds of the city can be heard outside of the church's heavy walls. Chippy's eyes flutter open. She moans and gasps her arching chest. Before her, the tree of life hangs on the wall and she blinks away tears. Memories from what happened. Memories of hell fresh in her mind.
I died and rose again,
she whispered. Suddenly she was yanked into the darkness and a door shut, blocking her entry.
Chippy, this is for your own good,
comes Evie's and Sylvie's voice.
Not sure what happened to you, but something isn't right. You rest and I'll handle things till you are more yourself again.
Evie states. Suddenly a room appears, a windowless room with a bed, a nightstand, a lamp and a bookshelf. The Bible laying open on her bed to the same page it had been in hell. Slowly more features like a rug and that same candle and portrait appear. Chippy walks over by the bookshelf and suddenly there's an armchair and she sits and picks up the Bible and begins to read. On a hill in the furthest reaches of hell, its landscape torn in the mad howls of the wind screaming and dancing, Volbert kneels in chains. The chains rusted now, corroded, visibly weaker than they were before. Their hold on him had begun to slip. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Thank you, Chippy.